Hello and welcome to Faith Matters, the programme where we look at Merseyside life through the prism of faith and belief. And today's theme is an LGBT faith. And in the studio today are our guests, Warren Hartley and Sue Branch. Welcome, guys. Let me just invite you just to tell our viewers, introduce yourself to our viewers and tell us a little bit about what you do and where you're from.
My name's Warren Hartley. I'm originally from Sydney, Australia. Been living here in Liverpool for about 9 years. I work in event management in Liverpool, and I attend St Bride's Church along with my civil partner. At St Bride's, I run an LGBT Christian group called Open Table, which is about providing a safe and affirming place for LGBT people to explore the Christian faith and what that might mean for them.
Okay, Sue.
Hi, I'm Sue Branch, and I'm a Buddhist. I am the current chair of Spectrum of Spirituality here in Liverpool. Obviously, I'm from here, and I've been chair for a couple of years now, but actually involved in Spectrum for about 4 years now. And my original background was I was an Anglican.
Oh, were you?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And so tell us very briefly about that, how you made that transition to being a Buddhist.
Probably I spent like 15 years and I call it my spiritual wilderness. I just lost faith in everything. And it came back through the death of a close friend, actually. But Buddhism was the way that I ended up going. It was.
And did you, being a person from the LGBT community yourself, did you feel alienated by the church in some way?
I think virtually all the churches and all the faiths have issues with LGBT people, so I wouldn't particularly say, and I do think that it runs across the board actually.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, thank you. Now, just tell us a little bit about Spectrum of Spirituality, because you're a former chair, aren't you? Am I right in saying that, Warren?
Yep,
so you've both been involved in Spectrum. It's part of Liverpool Pride.
Yes, it is.
Just tell our viewers a little bit about Spectrum.
Spectrum came about through the efforts of 4 people, one of them being Warren Hartley, one being Robert Ray, 3 being Kieran Bowen, and 4 being Tim Meadows. And would you like to say how it really all started?
Well, on the first Liverpool Pride in 2010, there was a group of Christians who got together and thought, well, we should do a service on the eve of Liverpool Pride, and that'll be nice and simple, something ecumenical, keep it simple. And we got approached by Liverpool Council. They asked 4 gay Christians, can you do an interfaith service for us? And we thought, I don't know whether we could do that or not. But so we thought, well, we'll give it a go, and we got in touch with friends, and we got a group of about 15, 20 with about 7 or 8 different faiths represented, and we did this big event. We had about 100 people attending, and a huge variety of faiths and non-faith, LGBT, straight. It was an incredible celebration, really, of our diversity and our faith in the city, and it was done on the eve of Liverpool Pride. And it was, as far as we know, the first time that anyone had done that as part of an official Pride event.
As a faith-based thing?
Yeah, as an official event of Pride.
Any Pride event across the country?
Other Pride events have had unofficial events.
Right, okay.
So groups of people have got together and done something, but Liverpool Pride almost commissioned us to do something like this. So as far as we know, that's unique.
And what have you done since? I mean, I've been to a couple of events, but I think I've been to 2 or 3 years worth of events.
I mean, I think I think one of the things to say is obviously as a group, and we've evolved over the last 5 years, and I think we took the decision 18 months ago to not to rebrand ourselves, but actually to include, because we're actually an LGBTQIA group.
Can you just define that?
Yeah. Lesbian, gay, transgender, transsexual, queer and intersex and bisexual, yeah. And the A is for allies, not necessarily asexual, which is one of the things. So we actually, just to broaden it out.
So you're for everybody, really, aren't you?
Kind of covering everybody, actually, or more to the point, bringing those people in who were excluded. So it was actually more of a case of bringing people in and recognising the diversity that sits around the table and actually out there on the street. So I think one of the things that we have done in the last few years as well is we've built on the foundations that people like Warren really laid down well for us. And we always have our main event, which is just pre-Pride, which is our big celebration of the year. And that's gone from an hour to about 2.5 hours now. Our last celebration was about 130 people. It's great, you know, people support us year in upon year, but we're also attracting new people. I think the other thing about Spectrum is last year, for the first time, we did an interfaith event on Interfaith Week, which went down really, really well outside of Primark, basically under the Christmas tree. And I think for me, one of the really interesting things was the people from the communities who necessarily won't come out and do their thing on the streets because of, you know, their histories and, the possibility of aggression and violence. People actually came out, which was, for me, was like phenomenal.
And how was that received by the public?
Fantastic. Really, not a bad word off everybody. It was fantastic. People were really, really supportive. We had, a whole range of people stop by because we were also making origami peace stuffs that people could write on. So it was kind of interactive. People gave us money. People were really, really pleasant and supportive. And earlier, last year, we also, for the first time, and there was only 4 of us, we actually went out on Idaho Day, which is on Bow Street.
Tell us what.
Sorry, Idaho Day is the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia, and actually, 1973, it celebrates when the World Health Organization.
17th of May in 1990, which was the day the World Health Organization removed homosexuality as a mental health condition.
Now, I know that Liverpool is a tolerant city, isn't it? I mean, I know we've had, very tragedies here, like obviously Michael Colza and other, things that have happened. But generally, is it a tolerant city towards LGBT people? Do you feel, or?
It's a difficult one to call, I think. I think it's a difficult one to call, because, I'm old now, so I don't go out. How it is out in the street, it's hard to say. I'm a professional woman. I'm surrounded by, all my friends are liberals, so it's hard to say. But I suspect it's still out there.
But the city, as a city, has taken strides forward, hasn't it, in terms of having is it called the gay zone? Is it
Gay Quarter, Stanley Street Quarter,
Stanley
Street Quarter, yeah. I think as a whole, as a city, particularly our leaders, even our faith leaders, have all spoken out quite strongly against homophobia and violence. So I think as a level, how far that trickles down into other communities is different. I think in inner city communities, complete tolerance, I think, complete acceptance. But I think in other parts of the city it can be more difficult.
Yeah, maybe like any community, really.
Like any community.
But I know on Idaho Day the police raise the flag, don't they?
They do. They raise the flag, and they plant flowers. And actually I have to say, and that's kind of across Merseyside as well. I was part of a small group of people who moved Halton into flying the flag on Idaho Day. But we went out on the street, and that was the first time we've gone out as like activists to raise the profile around the communities, out on the street, raise the profile in terms of how many countries in the world still carry the death penalty for being gay, or as we like to put it, loving another human being. The 82 countries in the world where, kind of homosexuality is still illegal. So I think there's something about, while things may have actually got better here worldwide, that's probably not the case. And in fact, things are probably getting worse.
And as a group, a Spectrum group, on the Pride March, you're on the Pride March as a group, are you? Together, so as an interfaith group marching together?
Yep.
And you have a stall?
Yes, we've had a stall just about every year, I think, yes.
And what kind of things do you have on your stall?
Well, we've networked with a lot of different inclusive faith communities. So we collect a lot of literature from Jewish, Buddhist, Christian, Unitarian, Quaker, pagan, you name it, whatever. If we've come across a community we feel comfortable that we could recommend somebody that they would be welcome to, we'll carry their literature, really. And people come along and have a chat to us about their faith, what community they've come from, and ways and communities in which they might be able to be part of again.
I mean, I know that I've been to your events, and they're not just unique in terms of being inclusive in terms of sexuality, but I think in just of being inclusive generally, that they kind of, in a way, set a standard, perhaps for other interfaith events. They're high quality, well attended, they're good fun.
Yeah.
They are good fun.
And the food's very good.
It is indeed, yes. Because it's about celebrating, and I think, because that's, I think, one of the biggest questions we discussed around making this happen, because again, I think we did it almost in spite of ourselves, that we broke, I think, just about every interfaith rule that existed out there in the world of interfaith.
I'm going to have to stop us now because we're going to our commercial break, and when we come back, we can talk about LGBT community and the spiritual experience. Back after the break. Welcome back to Faith Matters and to Warren and Sue. We're going to talk in this section a little bit about the LGBT community and the spiritual experience in general. Sue, you've talked a bit about your spiritual journey. Do you want to tell us anything more about that? You know, you're obviously a spiritual person. I mean, how did your journey take shape, as it were?
It's actually, I almost fell into Buddhism I don't want to say by accident, but obviously there are no accidents because it's all karma. But I was going somewhere for meditation. So I went to meditation at the beginning, then there was a lesson, then meditation. And after about 18 months, I kind of thought, actually, I've absorbed some of this and I really, really like it. And at that point, that's when I started to attend less for the meditation and more for the Buddhist teachings in the middle.
And there are different forms of Buddhist. Are you what sort of?
There are different forms of Buddhist. I'm a Tibetan Buddhist. So my spiritual leader in that sense is the Dalai Lama. But within Tibetan Buddhism, there's 5 schools, and under those sit lots of little schools as well. So it's actually, Tibetan Buddhism is, what actually happened was, Tibetan Buddhism, because of the isolation of Tibet, almost had a very pure form of Buddhism because they never had any influences for 1,000 years. So Buddha was born in North India, and if you go up through the northern route, which curves into Tibet and into China, where it's Chen, and then into Japan, where it's Zen, and so we're Mahayana Buddhists, where we strive for enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And there is the southern route that kind of went through, Ceylon, Sri Lanka, Thailand, that way, which is the Theravada Buddhists, where their main emphasis is personal enlightenment.
And on what branch are you in?
I'm in the Tibetan.
With no pun intended.
Yeah, Tibetan Buddhist.
Yeah.
Though there are several different schools in Liverpool, and I have to say, I occasionally sit with the Zen Buddhists on Hope Street as well.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not sectarian about these things.
Okay. Good. So, Warren, you're from Australia. You've got a Christian background, Pentecostal background?
Yes, so that was part of the mix. I grew up in a Christian family. My grandparents were Baptist. My father's an Anglican and my mother's a Methodist. So it was quite of a mixed. And so I grew up going to church as a child and was quite drawn to Christianity, but found something of a disconnect really from it. In high school, I went to a Christian school, and as part of that, I became involved with a charismatic church, the Assemblies of God in Australia. I attended them until my early 20s.
And how old was that when you got?
That was from about the age of 14 through to my early 20s.
So you were getting involved with this church possibly at the same time you were becoming aware of your sexuality?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
And that kind of fueled quite a disconnect, really, for me, between my faith and who I was discovering myself to be, and what I was being taught by my faith community of what this meant, that it was a sin, that it was evil, morally wrong, all this kind of stuff. And so I really quite struggled with it. Certainly didn't tell anyone at school or at church. It wasn't something you sort of learnt pretty quickly after you'd sat through one or two hell and fire sermons about it all, and how gays were going to be the downfall of modern civilization. You kind of learnt to be quiet about this stuff. But eventually I did open up to one of my pastors about it, and when I was about 20, and he recommended that I go to some counselling, and we'll talk about that later. But I went through a period of that, and I got to my early 20s and thought, you know what, I've had enough of this. This is just nonsense. So I left the church. I was working for the church as well at the time, working for the theological college. And so I left the church, my job, shook the dust off my feet and walked away swearing I would never set foot in church again for the rest of my life. And I kept that promise for about 8 years.
Never say never.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yes, God has certainly got a very good sense of humour. And yeah, about 7 or 8 years later, around the time I was deciding to come out and be honest with my family and friends about the fact that I was gay, I actually started feeling drawn back to church. And I thought,
you were here in the UK then?
No, this was about 2 years before I came over. And I thought, this is nonsense, this is silly, so I ignored it. Then I saw a church advertised in a gay newspaper in Sydney, and I thought, that can't be right. How can they be doing that? I thought, so I've got to check this out. So I went over thinking, right, I'm going to prove you guys wrong, and you're not going to welcome me. And it was probably the most affirming, welcoming, beautiful experience I'd ever had. Very different tradition to the one I'd grown up. It was a high church Anglican, one of the very few in Sydney. There aren't very many of those, and it was just a phenomenal, transcendent experience. Very theologically liberal, so just so removed from my experience of Christianity growing up. But it was beautiful, an extraordinary experience. And I've been kind of involved with church ever since, and it set me on an incredible journey back into faith and exploring spirituality.
And so you came to the UK, and you got involved with some brides, or straight away?
The parish, yeah. There's 3 churches in our parish. So I was worshipping at St Stephen's, which is now closed, but got involved with some brides kind of early on in the piece, because they advertised themselves as being inclusive, and so I thought, well, it'd be great to sort of be involved in that, and I've found it a fantastic community to be a part of.
And you helped set up the Open Table?
Not originally. I got involved pretty early on in the piece. Some brides was trying to set up a group called Changing Attitude. Changing Attitude's a campaigning group within the Anglican Church to try and campaigning for the full inclusion of LGBT people within the life of the Anglican Church.
And what is it, just to intercede there, what does it mean, the full inclusion?
Full inclusion would be that there's no difference between the LGBT people and anybody else is treated no differently. Ordination, marriage, the full works. It's treating them no differently.
And leadership.
And leadership, yeah. So that so ordination should be no difference. So that's kind of started as that, but it didn't really take off. But out of that, we decided we'd meet monthly for a Eucharist, sort of central act of worship for the Christian community, and offering the Eucharist to the LGBT community that as often, certainly was my experience, that I felt excluded from taking communion, even as a younger person, because I was aware of who I was and that was a sin, so therefore I can't take communion. So many people feel that they're not welcome to this central act of worship. So we felt it was really important to be offering that, and so that's where it grew from. And originally I was just opening the church up, and over the years it's grown, it's developed, it's trebled and quadrupled in numbers. to becoming, between 30 and 40 meeting every month for worship.
And now you're advising other dioceses, is that right?
Well, we're being approached. Other people have got in touch with us independently. So there's a group in Warrington, St John's United Reformed Church, have now started their own one in Warrington. There's a group in Manchester who've been meeting for 7 or 8 years, and they're relaunching now as Open Table. There's a group in Canterbury who got in touch with us and said, what's your experience? How would we go about doing something like this? So they're all independent, but we've just shared our experience, really.
Okay, great. Exciting stuff. At the Spectrum gathering this year, I just remember, it was such a great gathering, but I remember you said something about, Sue, about LGBT weddings, and you were encouraging people really to think about what an LGBT wedding would look like. Am I right in saying that?
I suppose probably the way I would phrase it is, everyone's talking about gay weddings, and you kind of go, and gay marriage, and you kind of go, actually no, because actually there aren't any gay weddings at the moment. There are weddings of gay people. And I suppose what I was trying to say is we've come a long way, but actually I think for me, what it is we haven't yet formed our own customs and traditions. So actually all we're doing is absorbing the traditions of heterosexual marriage. And I think for me, there's something about marriage, especially as a woman, is very patriarchal. It's about power, it's about control. And I think as a communities, we've spent so many years trying to forge our own identity and our own sense of self that actually, at some point, I think that will happen. I think we will end up having gay weddings and gay marriage.
And from that, do you think there's such a thing as an LGBT spirituality?
I think it's yes and no, to kind of sit on the fence, really. I think some of the experiences of growing up and becoming aware of who you are and being different, or dare I say even though we use the word queer, which has got a very specific political meaning now, not so much the derogatory term it used to be. So I think that shapes who we are. It shapes how we see life. And so that will shape how we see spirituality, I think. But also no, because we're human beings, and there's, the needs are often the same, but the experiences of discovering who we are and just the circumstances of our life are different. So that certainly shapes how we see spirituality.
I think there's not a disconnect, but I think there is. I think because a lot of people come from a place where they've almost been rejected by their faith or their churches, and I think that informs. I also think that the gay communities are uncomfortable with faith, so sometimes what you get is almost human beings being caught between two stones, basically. And that's one of the things I really love about Spectrum, is the fact that we are a safe space.
Okay, that's great. And I have heard it said, we're going to our break now, but I have heard it said that LGBT people are possibly more open to spiritual things than...
So I've heard that said as well, yeah. I'd be very interested. I think there is a definite interest in the community to explore this.
Well, we're going to our break now, a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to pick up on some of what you were saying, Warren, and talk about reparative therapy. So join us after the break. Welcome back to Faith Matters, and to Sue and Warren. We're talking about LGBT faith today on Faith Matters. Want to pick up on the whole area of reparative therapy. Warren, when you were talking about your faith journey, you kind of touched on it, and you said we would come to it later. What is it? What is reparative therapy, and what's been your personal experience of it?
Reparative therapy, people might have heard of this conversion therapy. Well, reparative therapy is one particular type of conversion therapy. Reparative kind of means repair. So the central idea is that all people are heterosexual. And anybody who turns out to be homosexual, something has happened in their childhood or their growing up and experience has caused this. And so through psychotherapy, this particular form of psychotherapy, you can repair this damage and therefore release somebody's latent heterosexuality. It was developed by an American clinical psychologist by the name of Joseph Nicolosi. And
so it was a secular thing originally, was it?
well, I think he's from the church, but he particularly focuses it from, he doesn't, it's not purely church, but it's certainly been adopted, particularly in America, but also in the UK. There are groups, even in this city, that operate reparative therapy groups. So this is the idea. There's very little evidence to suggest that it works.
So medical evidence.
Medical evidence. There's certainly no peer-reviewed evidence. There's various reports that have come out and studies that purport to show some change or none, but they're all very highly disputed. Most of the psychological places, like the British Psychological Society, British Association of Counsellors, psychotherapists, and even the Christian Counsellors Association, all say that this form of therapy is unethical, is anecdotally has shown increases of suicide, depression, anxiety, self-harm, self-loathing. So there's a lot of evidence to show that this is an outcome, with almost no evidence to show that there's any other outcome of.
So it's basically it damages people, is what you're saying.
Certainly, and that was certainly my experience of it. Well, as I said, it was part of my journey. As I had spoken to my pastor, I was 19. Desperately wanted to fit in and be normal, whatever the devil that means. And so he recommended that I go along to this group that operated in Sydney, no longer operates. And I spent about 2 years in this group. It was run by a counsellor who promised us all sorts of change. So it was partly watching video program input from an American psychologist. Part of it was prayer, part of it was counselling. A lot of it was this stuff about adopting very traditional male, what's the word I'm looking for?
Gender roles. Gender roles,
thank you, yeah. Get yourself to the gym and muscle up and, yeah.
How'd you get on with that?
Well, it's patently ridiculous, really, when you look at it. And after about 2 years of this, I was severely depressed. I mean, seriously, clinically depressed, yeah.
Because it wasn't working?
Not at all, and absolutely no change. And, really, there was no hope of it ever changing. We were being sold snake oil. We really were.
Because you were trying to change your very nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You're trying to deny, and
in a way, it would be equivalent of trying to make me gay.
Exactly. Exactly. It's exactly the same thing. So the idea was it was a mental illness, that we can cure this mental illness. And actually what it did was create a mental illness for me and for many others. That's certainly the anecdotal evidence that this is what it does for people. So I got out of it. But sadly, it's still a common experience. It is still being offered by particularly conservative Christian groups, but also by Jewish groups, Muslim groups, so it's not just Christian, but it's the same basic concept.
So any experience of this at all?
No, I haven't actually, no, but listening to Warren and the fact that it's about repairing suggests that if you're gay, you're broken. Mm-hmm. You're not whole in some way, so I can understand why you would end up feeling depressed, especially when it wasn't working, because that just reinforces that you're broken, you're inadequate, the feelings that you have are not right. Exactly.
Not praying hard enough, I haven't got enough faith, I haven't, all of this kind of...
If you pray hard enough and meet the right woman, it'll all be fine.
Yes, absolutely. It was, and I guess... And after I left, I could kind of see it for what it was, and sort of looking back after quite some time now, after the experience, they just had it wrong. And I think that's the biggest thing. It was that it's, the biggest teaching was, do not go down this path, because you will end up sleeping with 300 men and you'll get AIDS and you'll die alone. That was the message, and I had that said to me. Do not go down this path. You will die alone, and you will all die of AIDS. And it's just so false. Because I think it's what the...
It's a deception.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think what the turnaround for me was when I started to accept who I was, and actually I started to blossom. The depression went, that disappeared, never come back to bother me again. And it opened me up to the possibilities. And, you know, what it meant is when I met my now civil partner and soon-to-be husband, I was opened up into a life of the possibility of love. And it's been absolutely transformative and nothing but positive.
In the same way that love transforms anybody's
Absolutely.
life when
Yeah.
we're fortunate enough to find it,
Exactly.
with whomever it is.
Absolutely.
And it's not a very spiritual experience. Love is a very spiritual experience.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in a sense, that love being at the heart of really all spiritual and religious
Yes.
traditions. And I think, was it Liverpool Pride theme this year? Love is not a crime.
Love is not a crime. Yes.
And love is not a sin.
Love is not a sin.
Yeah.
Um, so, but just picking up on what you've just said there, Warren, in the States, as this has become more and more discredited, reparative therapy, some proponents of it, some quite well-known proponents, have stood up and said, you know, we were wrong. Is that correct?
Yeah, there used to be a group called Exodus. Exodus International, I think it was called, because there was Exodus International and Exodus Global. Exodus International was a group run by somebody by the name of, his name's just escaped me, it'll come back to me. But Alan Chambers, and he was one of the early founding members. And it was a ministry that had ministries it was an umbrella group for ministries all across the globe, including some in London and Sydney and other places. And it was a huge organisation. You know, they had dozens and dozens of employees, big headquarters in America. And over a period of time, they had yearly conferences, and over a period of time, there were sort of declining numbers. And he got to a point about 2 or 3 years ago where he said, actually, what we're doing is wrong, and I'm going to apologise. And he stood up at the annual conference, what turned out to be the last annual conference, and issued an incredible, heartfelt and profound apology to the LGBT community to say, what we are doing is wrong and we have hurt you and we are shutting down. And they closed the whole organisation.
And there was an organisation in the UK as well that had a similar sort of...
Similar, yes. There was a group called Courage based in London by Jeremy Marks, which initially, and it had been his journey, he was a conservative evangelical Christian, and when he's in one of these groups, got married to a woman, and was working with people to try and sort of do similar journeys. But what he was finding again was this evidence of people are just hurting and I'm causing pain. So he went on this whole journey and decided to turn the ministry from reparative therapy into a gay affirming ministry and creating a safe, sacred space for LGBT Christians. And that just blossomed into an incredible ministry in London, which is now closed, but they've developed into what they call 223, which is an incredible movement in London.
Okay, so how should society and culture respond to, you know, what is obviously perceived within the gay community as a threat, the threat of reparative therapy and similar kind of therapies? What do you think, Sue?
In terms of a societal response, Warren's absolutely right. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that it works. But I think there's something more fundamental than that, isn't it? That actually it shouldn't even be experienced because it does come from a very negative place. That gay people are broken, they're wrong, they shouldn't be like this. And actually, I do think that's really powerful, and that's a very powerful message that, you know, young gay people get, which is really damages them, and, you know, the pain that people go through. So I actually think we should make it illegal because A, it doesn't work, and B, the actual basis of it is so oppressive and discriminatory that, you know, under Equality Act legislation, we should actually just be going, no, actually, it's a hate crime almost for me, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think I'm with Sue in that all therapy should be based around the flourishing of the human being It's a very biblical thing, you know. Jesus said, I came to give life and life abundantly. So anything we do should be about the flourishing of a human being. And anything that takes away from that flourishing, like reparative therapy, it just shouldn't, it's utterly unethical and in my opinion, immoral. And we shouldn't be practicing it because it does not create the conditions in which a life can flourish.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing. I mean, very, very personal, Warren, for sharing that, and for Sue for your contribution to that part of the discussion. We're going now to another commercial break, after which, when we come back, we'll be talking about the relationship of the church to the LGBT community. We'll be asking Sue to share from a Buddhist perspective on that as well. So join us after the break. Welcome back to Faith Matters, where we're talking about the LGBT community and faith issues around that. And welcome again to Sue and Warren. In this section, I want to talk about the church in particular, but religious communities in general, and their attitude towards LGBT folk. Here's a question. If maybe it's a no-brainer really, but if the church was to be more inclusive and welcoming and affirming towards LGBT people, would this make LGBT folk more willing to engage, do you think? Do you think it's as simple as that?
I don't know. Perhaps it certainly is about, because for me, church and spirituality is about making sacred space and creating that space that's welcoming, brings people in so they can explore for themselves. So yes, I think that would create a space where people are welcome. So perhaps more people would certainly engage. I think what would certainly happen is the LGBT people that are already within our churches and faith communities, and there are lots and lots of them, would suddenly be able to be themselves amongst their own community.
So some of those people are out within those communities, right?
Yeah.
But some of the people are kind of like,
absolutely,
keep it hidden, even if they're out elsewhere in their lives.
Absolutely,
that's true, isn't it? Yeah. But that would just give them the freedom then to
absolutely, it's about
just to be
bringing your
themselves.
whole self.
It's about your whole self. Yes.
Absolutely. That wholeness. Holiness is about wholeness. And about if you can be all of yourself. I think that's been the great joy with my partner and I being able to worship in the same church together. Partner's originally Roman Catholic, and we couldn't be out together as a couple and worship together as a couple within that environment. But we have been able to where we are at St Bride's, and that's been a great joy for us.
So there's a history of exclusion within the Christian church, which goes back centuries, really, millennia even. And do you want to comment on that?
It seems to have been particularly strong within all three Abrahamic faiths. So of course, we've all sort of traced the three great Abrahamic faiths go back to Abraham.
So that's Judaism, Christianity and Islam.
Yeah, and you know there was certainly some prejudice around LGBT issues that seems to have crept into the Old Testament and the sort of evidence of old cultural prohibitions. So it's ancient. It's an ancient prejudice, and so that's why it's taking so long, I think, to kind of get rid of it. But I think we need to go back and unpack it. That's certainly my impression. That we've codified a cultural prohibition, and we need to unpick that and look at it, because you know something within the Christian tradition, we look at the fruits of the Spirit. If something is developing the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, then it's of God. That comes from God. So you know if something isn't bearing good fruit, then perhaps it's not so good. So we've got to look at it, and you know, the lives of LGBT people are producing this fruit of the Spirit. So that's why we need to go back and unpick and look at this again, and not just accept it, swallow it blindly as a cultural prohibition.
And so, the Buddhist community, one has the impression of Buddhism that it's a completely open, welcoming, inclusive, accepting religion. Is this true in regard to LGBT folk?
I think every faith sits within a cultural setting, depending on what country they are. Tibetans are a very conservative people, but the school that I belong to is that was founded by Tibetan lamas, is very open and very welcoming to gay people, because for them it's not an issue, because it's all about love, compassion, how you behave as a human being as opposed to your sexuality. So I mean, I suppose that for me that's so much easier. And I'm aware that, you know, through the members of Spectrum, though, you know, like the Unitarians, who are very, very open to gay people, and actually in some ways that makes it easier for them. But when you kind of come across the church that isn't so forgiving around people's sexuality, like the Catholic Church, the Anglicans, and you know, what you actually do see is the pain that causes people. But Buddhism, in that sense, is no different. We are a little bit more welcoming, because obviously within Buddhism it's about the individual, not so much the collective, as it were. But it still has a long way to go, because
so there's that cultural baggage there.
There's cultural baggage there, yeah. Yeah, there's cultural baggage, and I think it's about trying to change the culture, because if you look at sexuality over the last 1,000 years, what's been acceptable has changed radically. You know, there was time when, you know, kind of people, you know, there was a lot of what we would probably describe now as, you know, bisexuality, because it wasn't an issue in the same way that it is now. So I think culture influences the church, and the church influences culture. But I think part of the challenge for the LGBTQIA community is to make sure that the balance is weighted that way and not with the church. I think the church is going to have to move. They're going to have to move.
And the church is moving, isn't it? You know, it's been said that, you know, if you look at the New Testament and the Old Testament and the New Testament, you know, that two or three centuries ago, you know, slavery was something that, you know, in this city, Liverpool, where we are now, was something that certainly wasn't condemned by the church, often upheld by the church. Now, there's not a church anywhere, I don't think, that would uphold slavery today. You know, certainly not one I know of. And then, you know, a century or so later, in the 20th century as well, you had the issue around kind of women in leadership and the role of women in the family and in work, and there was a whole set of prejudice based on some of the perceptions of the teachings of St. Paul, and now, you know, even within the conservative evangelical tradition, there's not many churches around that would still hold those views. To the substantial shifts, and now really perhaps the cultural battleground is now on this issue. Is that true? Do you think that's a fair assessment?
I think so. Certainly, in my experience of it, yeah, there's been huge shifts, even in the last 20 or 30 years, around things. And I think that must have been true for previous generations on other issues as well. And it's because once an issue becomes visible, and you suddenly realise it's amongst you and it's one of you, you suddenly have to deal with the issue. When it's over there, you don't have to deal with it. When you can other it, when you can exclude it, you can sort of continue along. But when you suddenly see it amongst you, you need to sort it out.
I know that. Sorry,
yeah, because I slightly disagree with that. I think probably. Here, I mean, I think, I don't know how it's going to pan out in terms of possibly, we were withdrawing from the Human Rights Act in Europe. I think what we're starting to see in America is the backlash. Backlash is growing.
Yeah. And in Russia, of course.
Yeah, and in Russia. But, you know, in terms of the states where you've got, you know, the Supreme Court have just ruled that, you know, same-sex marriage, everyone has to do it. But now, you know, we've got Indiana. The governor has just put on the statute books about people's religious freedom. So what they're saying is, yeah, you can discriminate against gay people all you like, because actually it's religious freedom. So actually, personally, I see the storm crowds gathering, and I don't mean that to just be a naysayer, but I think what we need to I think what we need to do is go, it's fantastic, we have same-sex marriage now, we have all of that, but actually, let's not take our eye off the ball.
Absolutely. Warren, can you just say, as we've got a couple of minutes left, can you just tell us a little bit about shared conversations in the Church of England?
Yeah,
A note of hope, perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps. Shared conversations is a process that's come out a couple of years ago. The House of Bishops for the Church of England commissioned a report called the Pilling Report, which was about how does the Anglican Church get to grips with the issue of same-sex marriage and LGBT people within this framework, this older framework of theology. And how do we look again at the biblical stuff? So this report one of the recommendations of this report was a period of 2 years where shared conversations, where groups from various dioceses would get together on the spectrum of opinion on the issue, from completely for to completely against and all points in between, because of course it's a spectrum of opinion. And that's ongoing at the moment.
And you're involved with this?
Yes, I'll be going along to the regional one in the next couple of weeks. There's a few more to go next year as well, and all of that experience will be pulled together for discernment and
that's
reflection.
bringing together both sides of the
Absolutely,
argument.
the whole spectrum together of opinion to get to know one another. This whole thing of, if you. Bishop James, the previous Bishop of Liverpool, used to talk about megaphone diplomacy. Solves nothing. It's one lot shouting to the other. So this is actually getting everyone together in a room, facilitated, respectful, sacred, safe space to explore and get to know one another.
That's great. It's just been lovely to have you on the show today, and thanks for coming and sharing so personally with us. Wish you well with Open Table, with Spectrum next year. Look forward to joining you. Thank you to our viewers for joining us on Faith Matters today, and we'll see you for the next episode. Take care.